Dr. Aldrin had said it that morning. Don't waste your medicine on that man. She had said nothing. Then, 12 hours later, she went down to the cellar for linen and saw the boots. The supply chest upstairs was nearly empty, and the man in the corner cot needed fresh bandages before morning. She had not expected to find anything else in the cellar of St. Brendan's except hay bales and the particular smell of old wood she had stopped noticing months ago. She lifted her lantern. He was behind the furthest bale, gray coat, dark with mud. One hand pressed flat against his left side, eyes open, watching her with the careful stillness of someone who has run out of better options.
Who else knows you're here?
Nobody, please. I came through the east wall, the stone that's loose. I've been here since yesterday. I didn't know anyone would come down before morning.
How bad is it?
Bad enough that I couldn't keep moving. Not bad enough to be the end of things, I think.
You think?
I've been managing it for 3 days. The bleeding stopped, which I take as encouraging.
She looked at him, not at his face, but at the whole of him, the way she looked at patience, the position, the angle of his shoulder, the color beneath the beard. He was feverish, but not dangerously so. Not yet. She set the lantern on top of the bale.
Move your hand.
I'd like to know.
Move your hand and I'll look at it. Those are your options right now.
He moved his hand. She worked in near silence for 20 minutes. The wound was a deep laceration along the lower left side, not a bullet, something edged, cleaned inadequately with what he'd had on him. It needed proper cleaning, proper binding, and time above all things. He did not make a sound while she worked. He knew how to separate himself from the discomfort enough to let someone else work without interference.
I'll need to bring something for the infection. It's already starting. I'll have to go back upstairs.
Don't tell anyone I'm here.
I heard you.
Please.
She looked up at him then. She had been avoiding his face while she worked. Faces were a distraction. They put you in a relationship with a person before the moment was ready for one. He was looking back with an expression that was not desperation, not fear, but the quieter and more exhausted thing that lives on the far side of both. She had seen that expression in the mirror, once or twice.
I'm going to get what I need. I'm going to come back. And then you're going to tell me enough that I understand what I'm dealing with. That's the arrangement.
And if I don't tell you?
Then I've still treated the wound, because I'm not capable of leaving it untreated. But I'll know less, and knowing less makes me less useful. Your choice.
She went upstairs, leaving the supply bag on the cellar floor. There was nothing in it he could use to escape, and she would need it again before morning. She returned 12 minutes later with antiseptic, a proper bandage, and a tin cup of willow bark tea that she'd brewed while standing at the stove with her back to the room so no one could read her face. She told no one. St. Brendan's had been a proper church once, with painted windows and wooden pews worn smooth by a generation of Sunday mornings. The pews had been pushed to the walls to make room for cots, and the cots were filled with men from both sides of a war that had no intention of finishing. The painted windows threw their colored light across all of them without distinction, which Ruth had always found either comforting or ironic, depending on the day. The altar remained at the far end. No one had been willing to move it. It stood like a quiet judgment over everything that happened beneath it. She had come to Garrow's Crossing with James 2 years ago. James had been certain about the town, about the future, about the house on the North Road he'd said would suit them perfectly. He had enlisted 3 weeks after they arrived. He had died at Bull Run before she had finished unpacking their single shared trunk. She had stayed. By the 2nd month, it was the work. By the 6th month, it was simply where she was. Dr. Aldrin came in just before noon, as he always did. He was a man who believed in punctuality the way other men believed in God, absolutely, and without examining the underlying assumptions. He stood at the foot of the corner cot for approximately 4 seconds. He told her plainly that she was wasting her medicine on that man, that the morphine she'd administered last night could have gone to someone with a realistic chance of recovery. That compassion, however admirable in its way, had to be weighed against practicality, and that a woman with her evident aptitude ought to understand this by now. Then he left. Ruth did not respond. She had learned by now that some arguments were not arguments, they were performances, and the only winning move was to decline the stage. She tucked the edge of the bandage with the same care she always used, checked the man's breathing one more time, and went back to the supply chest. The linen was nearly gone. She pulled on her coat and went back to the cellar. His name he gave her on the second day, Thomas. Just Thomas for now. He held the last name the way people sometimes hold a card. Not hiding it, but waiting for the right moment. She didn't push. She had learned with men who had been in the field a long time that information came out in its own order, and pressing only made it come out wrong. What she noticed was how he received care. He didn't fight the cleaning of the wound, didn't flinch away. He drank the tea without complaint, even the second batch, which tasted approximately like river water in autumn. When she told him to stay still, he stayed still.
You've been around medicine before.
My mother believed that illness shouldn't be a mystery kept only by men with degrees. She learned what she could and taught what she learned.
She was a sensible woman.
She was. She died of pneumonia in the winter of '58. There was a doctor in the town. He had a full schedule apparently. He didn't come.
Ruth absorbed this. She was familiar with the version of medical care that sorted its patients by what they were worth rather than what they needed. It was one of the things that had made her stay in St. Brendan's, even when she'd had other options. At least here, the work was the work, uncomplicated by that particular kind of arithmetic.
I need you to take the morphine tonight. The fever is climbing.
I'd rather not.
I'm aware of what you'd rather. The fever needs to be managed.
It takes the edges off. I can't think clearly when the edges are off.
You don't need to think clearly. You need to sleep.
Those aren't the same thing for me right now.
She looked at him steadily. He looked back.
If I take it, will you stay until I'm under?
She should have said no. She had 7 men upstairs, a supply inventory half finished, and a floor that hadn't been properly cleaned in 4 days.
Yes.
She stayed. She sat on an overturned crate and watched his breathing slow and even out, and stayed well past the point where it was necessary. Walking back up the stairs, she noticed something she hadn't felt since James. Not comfort, nothing as settled as that. More like the specific quality of air that exists in a room where something is happening, as opposed to a room where things have simply stopped. She noticed it. She filed it away. She went back to work. On the 4th day, Dr. Aldrin called a meeting. He stood at the front of the nave with his hands clasped behind his back and the expression of a man delivering news he finds personally inconvenient. A military inspector was making rounds through the county. He would reach Garrow's Crossing in 3 days. His purpose: accounting for Union supplies and investigating reports of Confederate deserters sheltering in civilian structures. Anyone found harboring a deserter would face consequences. He did not specify the consequences. He didn't need to. He looked at no one in particular. Ruth looked at the floor. Ruth went down to the cellar that evening. She was reaching into the supply bag for clean linen when her hand found something that wasn't hers. A folded piece of paper tucked between the bag's inner lining and its frame. She hadn't put it there. She opened it. A map, hand-drawn, careful. The roads around 3 settlements to the south and west of Garrow's Crossing, but there were no troop positions, no supply lines. Instead, small notations in cramped, precise handwriting, the number of civilians in each settlement, the safest routes out, the houses where families could shelter overnight without being noticed. This was not a soldier's map. This was something else entirely. She folded it, put it back exactly where she'd found it. She set it on the hay between them and looked at him. He looked at the map, then at her. His expression gave nothing away, which was its own kind of answer.
You could have kept this somewhere I wouldn't find it.
I could have.
Why didn't you?
I needed to know what you would do with it. People say one thing and do another. Objects are more honest.
How many people?
On those routes specifically, 43 that I can account for. There are likely more that moved because of information that passed through me to someone else.
Families.
Mostly. Some older men who couldn't fight. 2 women traveling alone. 1 family with 4 children under the age of 8.
Ruth was quiet for a moment. A cart passed on the road above. She could hear the wheels on the frozen mud.
The inspector arrives in 3 days.
I know.
I need to understand what I'm deciding. I need the last name.
He gave it to her. Thomas Elliot Whitmore. She heard it and said nothing. Something shifted in her face. Just a small thing, a fractional change in the set of her mouth. He watched it the way a man watches weather from a window when he has no shelter to retreat to. Everyone in a 50-mile radius knew the name Whitmore. General Cornelius Whitmore was not the most decorated officer on the Confederate side, but he was among the most discussed because his methods generated discussion. He was the kind of man about whom people said he did what was necessary, and what people meant when they said that was usually something they preferred not to name directly.
You know who he is?
Yes.
Then you understand why the name complicates things.
Tell me in your words, not what I know, what you know.
He told her, carefully, without flinching from the details, which was harder than it looked, the kind of telling that requires you to stay present in the worst parts. His brother had issued an order in October. 3 civilian settlements south of a contested supply corridor, not military targets, families. The reasoning was that cutting off those settlements would eliminate a source of food and shelter for Union forces moving through the region. The reasoning was coherent, in a way that made it worse. Thomas had refused the order. He had warned 2 of the 3 settlements before it could be carried out, had helped those families find other routes, other places to shelter. He had been flogged for insubordination, scheduled for formal military punishment. He had left the night before the punishment was to be administered. Not because he feared it, because he knew that staying meant the next order would come, and the one after that, and at some point refusing stops being a choice.
I didn't desert the cause of the war. I deserted the cause of one man who had decided that the war justified whatever he chose to do in its name. There is a difference. I'm aware not everyone would see it.
How many people, total? Not just the map.
Between 60 and 80 that I know of directly, probably more that I don't.
She nodded once, slowly. Then she stood and picked up his papers and held them toward him.
Write it down, all of it. Names, dates, locations, what was ordered and by whom. Everything you remember, as if you were writing for someone who will need to prove it later.
Why?
Because a story that only exists in one person's memory stops existing when that person does. Details written down are harder to make disappear.
She left him with a stub of pencil and the back of the map. She went upstairs and stood at the window for a moment, looking at the road. She thought about the difference between a decision you make and a decision you discover you've already made. She had already made this one, sometime between finding the map and asking for his name. She went back to her patients. She moved him to the sacristy on the 8th day. A lockable door, a single window overlooking the orchard, close enough to the nave that she could reach it quickly, a proper chair, a table with a lamp that worked. He spread his papers across the table and kept writing. The stack grew daily. She brought him additional scraps when he ran out of room. He didn't waste them.
What are you writing now? You finished the names.
Roots. The ones that worked, the ones that didn't, and why. Every obstacle I found, every unexpected shelter, every person who helped without being asked.
Who is this for?
I don't know yet. Someone who needs this kind of information for the same reasons I needed it. These things don't stop being useful when one particular war ends.
She watched him work. His handwriting was precise, even the handwriting of someone who had been taught by someone who considered it important.
Your mother taught you to write like that.
She made me copy out passages from books every evening until the letters came out right. Said a man who couldn't write clearly couldn't think clearly.
She had a point.
She had opinions about everything. It was her most defining quality and her most exhausting one, depending on which side of the opinion you were on.
Is your brother like her?
A pause. His pen stopped.
No, he has opinions too, but they don't come from the same place. Hers came from wanting things to be better than they were. His come from wanting things to be exactly as he has arranged them.
When did you know you were different from him?
I always knew. I didn't know it mattered until it did.
She sat down in the chair across from his table. She had a supply ledger with her. She opened it and did not immediately start writing in it.
He's going to come looking for you eventually.
Yes.
Not because he wants you back.
No, because what I know is inconvenient, and because Cornelius has never in his life left a loose end loose.
Then we need to make sure what you know exists somewhere he can't reach it.
That's what I'm doing.
Do it faster.
He looked at her across the lamp. The corner of his mouth shifted, not quite a smile, but the beginning of the architecture that a smile would use. He turned back to his papers and wrote faster. She told him about James on the 6th evening. She hadn't planned to. She'd come with his supper, and he'd been writing, and she'd sat down, and the quality of the silence had been the particular kind that sometimes makes room for true things.
I came to Garrow's Crossing with a man named James Calloway. He was my fiancé. He enlisted in the spring of '61. He died at Bull Run 3 months later. I stayed here because I had nowhere else to go, and then because the work needed doing, and then because I had stopped knowing how to think about what else I might be doing instead.
Thomas set down his pen. He didn't offer condolence or philosophy or any of the things people produced in response to grief to show that they were taking it seriously. He let what she'd said be what it was.
He was Union,
Yes.
and you are here, treating me.
I'm a nurse. I treat who needs treating.
That's not the whole of it.
She looked at the lamp.
No, it's not the whole of it, but it's the part I can explain out loud.
I should leave tonight. The wound is well enough. And the inspector...
Don't.
The word came out before she'd organized it. It was the voice she used when she knew something was true before she'd finished reasoning through why. He looked at her.
The wound is not well enough. You'd open it again within the hour of walking, and then you'd be in a ditch with no one to close it a second time. That's the medical reason.
And the other reason...
I'm only offering you the medical one right now.
Silence. The lamp threw its small, steady light across the table and his papers and his careful handwriting that his mother had taught him when she was still alive to teach things.
All right, I'll stay.
She brought him soap on the 12th day and a razor. The razor had belonged to James. She set it on the table without explanation. He looked at it for a moment.
Ruth,
You don't need to.
I want to say it anyway. Thank you, not only for this.
She went upstairs. She stood in the gray winter light of the nave and felt something she hadn't felt in longer than she could name cleanly. Not happiness. Happiness was too definite, too arrived at. Something earlier than that, the sense of a territory ahead that was not entirely hostile. The faint awareness that some futures were possible that she had not been thinking of as possible. She stood there for a moment. Then she heard someone cough in the ward and went to see about it. The town began to notice things around the 3rd week. Not specific things, nothing definitive enough to act upon, but the accumulation of small observations that a small town is very good at making. Ruth was visiting the sacristy more often than the sacristy required. She was bringing more food from home than one woman needed. She was occasionally distracted in a way she hadn't been before. Dr. Aldrin stopped her after rounds one morning. He told her, in the measured tone he used for unpleasant necessities, that people in town were asking questions, that he himself had no questions, that he would prefer to continue having no questions. Ruth told him she had nothing to tell him. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, with the precision of a man filing information under a category he hadn't fully named yet. That evening she sat across from Thomas and told him what the doctor had said.
How much time do you think?
A week. Maybe 2, if nothing forces the issue.
And if something does?
Then less.
He leaned back and looked at the ceiling, low, plastered white once, now the color of time. She had come to recognize this as his thinking posture.
The problem is that what I have isn't finished. It's close, but close isn't done, and done is the only version that's actually useful.
Then tell me what's left. I'll write while you talk. We'll finish it faster.
He looked at her across the table.
You do that.
I'm offering to do that. Those are different things.
He turned his papers toward her and began to talk. She wrote. Her handwriting was different from his looser, faster, the handwriting of someone who had learned to keep up with information rather than to make it beautiful. They worked past midnight 2 nights running. She brought lamp oil from upstairs. On the 3rd morning before Patience arrived, Ruth folded a complete copy of everything Thomas had written and sealed it inside a letter addressed to a Union officer's office in the next county. She gave it to the mail courier herself on the road before the town was awake. She didn't tell Thomas. He found out when she mentioned it casually as she was leaving.
You sent a copy?
I sent a copy.
When?
This morning, before you were awake.
He looked at her for a long moment, then he turned back to his papers without another word. But his shoulders had changed, something in them had released that she hadn't realized was held. Patience Webb arrived that morning and found Ruth in the nave with ink on her fingers. She looked at her with those enormous honest eyes, said nothing at all, and began the morning's work. There was an evening in that 2nd week when the work of the ward had been heavy. 2 new arrivals, one of whom had not survived the night. Ruth came to the sacristy later than usual, still in her apron, carrying the particular exhaustion that settles into bone when the body has been asked too much for too long. She sat down in the chair across from Thomas's table and said nothing. She had nothing left for conversation. He looked at her once. Then he reached across and took the small Bible kept in the sacristy and opened it to the middle and began to read, not performing, not making an event of it, just reading in the steady, unhurried voice of someone who knew the words well enough not to have to concentrate on them. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep, but something in her stopped bracing, which was almost the same thing. When he finished the passage, he closed the book quietly. Neither of them said anything. The lamp burned low between them, and for a little while there was nothing required of either of them at all. The inspector came through on a Tuesday. He was a precise man, waxed mustache, new boots, the manner of someone recently given authority still working out how to hold it comfortably. Ruth met him at the door with her supply ledger already open. People with organized paperwork had nothing to hide, or at least looked that way, which in this situation amounted to the same thing. She showed him the ward. She answered his questions without embellishment. She did not volunteer information. He asked if she had noticed anything unusual. Strangers, structures being used for unofficial purposes. She said no. He wrote something in his ledger. Then he looked up. He asked about the sacristy. He said someone in town had mentioned the door was kept locked, which was unusual for a working ward. He'd like to see it. Ruth said the sacristy was used for medical supply storage, that the lock was new, that she kept it locked because supplies had gone missing twice in the winter, and she couldn't afford to lose more. She held his gaze while she said it. He held hers while he listened. Then he wrote something else in the ledger, closed it, and said the cellar would do and she was welcome to show him. She said of course, and led him there herself. He declined to go down the stairs. Men with organized ledgers rarely wanted to climb into root cellars. He declined. He left at midday. She stood at the door until his horse was out of sight. Then she sat down on the front step of St. Brendan's in the cold air and put her hands in her lap and took 3 very slow, very deliberate breaths. Patience Webb appeared in the doorway and asked if she was all right. Ruth said she was cold and went back inside. The rider came into Garrow's Crossing from the south on a Thursday morning in late February. Ruth was at the well when he passed. She recognized the uniform, Confederate gray, cleaner than most she'd seen. She recognized, 3 seconds later, the insignia on the shoulder that indicated a rank significantly above field officer. She finished drawing her water. She walked back to St. Brendan's at her normal pace. She locked the front door behind her. She went directly to the sacristy. Thomas looked up when she came in and read her face before she'd said a word.
Confederate officer. High rank. South Road.
How many men with him?
2 that I saw.
That's his size. He doesn't like large retinues. He says they slow movement and announce intention.
You're certain it's him?
He works south to north, always south to north, and he's been about a month behind me since December. I knew the town was likely. I didn't know the exact day.
What do you want to do?
What do I want or what makes sense?
Both.
He was quiet for a moment. He stood and moved to the window and looked out at the orchard. The trees were bare still, but there were suggestions of buds on the furthest branches. The first, tentative arguments that spring was on its way regardless of everything else.
What makes sense is that I surrender to the federal authority. Not to Cornelius, to the Union side, formally, with testimony. Names, dates, the order about the settlements, everything. Submitted through proper channels, it becomes a record. It protects the people who helped families escape, the ones who could be falsely blamed later.
And what do you want?
I want another month. Enough to finish this properly. Enough to make sure it's airtight before I hand it over. Enough to?
He stopped. He turned from the window.
I want to not leave yet.
Outside, the sound of the town had changed. Garrow's Crossing was a town of 700 people who had nothing else to pay attention to, and when something unusual came in from the South Road, the town adjusted around it. She could hear the adjustment, the particular texture of collective attention.
They'll come here. The church is always where people come when they want a stage.
Yes, Ruth, listen to me. You have already done more than could be asked of anyone. If you need to open that door and tell them where I am, I will not.
Don't finish that sentence.
I'm trying to say that I release you from...
Thomas, I heard you. Now stop talking.
She crossed to the table. She picked up the full stack of his papers, 2 weeks of work, names and routes and dates, and the precise record of what one man's conscience had cost him.
Is this complete?
Close.
How close?
An hour's work. Maybe 2.
Then sit down and finish it. Right now, I'll go to the door.
Ruth?
I'll be at the door, and you will finish writing. That is what is going to happen.
She went to the front of the nave. She unlocked the door and opened it and stood in the frame of it. The crowd was smaller than she'd feared, 8 people from town, the doctor at the front, Mrs. Holt behind him, and behind them a man in a gray uniform. His face, even from 20 feet away, was recognizably Thomas's face arranged by a different life into a different expression, harder, more closed, the face of a man who had learned early that certainty was a resource and had spent decades accumulating it. The doctor spoke first. There was reason to believe, he said, that a fugitive was being sheltered on church property, a deserter, a Whitmore. Ruth looked at him. She had known this man for 2 years. She had worked alongside him, deferred to him, absorbed his dismissals with the patience of someone who understands that being underestimated is not a defeat but a position. She told him that this was a house of God and a place of healing, and that she intended to keep standing in this door for as long as that remained true. The general spoke. His voice was lower than Thomas's, more settled in its authority, the voice of a man who had given orders so long that stating a thing and having it become true felt like the same action. He told her she was interfering with Confederate military jurisdiction and that she was harboring a man who had committed treason against the cause he had sworn to serve.
I'm a nurse. I don't sort my patients by their causes. I sort them by what they need.
The general looked at her with the expression of a man for whom this answer did not compute, not because he was unintelligent, but because it did not fit the categories he had learned to process. He was not accustomed to people whose logic did not include him as a variable. He looked at the door behind her. He looked back at her. He began to say something. Footsteps behind her. She did not turn. Thomas came to the door and stood beside her, not in front of her, not behind her, beside her, which was the only arrangement that made sense. He looked at his brother. His brother looked at him. The town went very quiet.
I'm going to the federal authority in Macon. I'm carrying a full account of the order issued in October regarding the civilian settlements, names, dates, testimony of witnesses, signed and complete.
The general's expression did not change. He was a man whose expression did not change, which was probably a skill he'd developed and then lost the ability to switch off.
You could try to stop me, but what I've written exists in more than one place now. You'd have to find all of them. I'm not sure that's a useful way to spend the end of a war.
The crowd shifted. Someone at the back said something she couldn't hear. Old Silas appeared at the edge of her vision from the side alley, moving with the unhurried deliberateness of a man who has decided what he's doing and is not interested in announcing it. The doctor was looking at Ruth with an expression she hadn't seen on his face before. Not approval, something more complicated. The early stages of reconsidering a conclusion he had thought was settled. The general looked at Thomas for a long moment. Then he looked at Ruth. His eyes spent exactly the right amount of time on her to communicate that he had assessed her, that the assessment was complete, and that she was a factor he had underestimated. He looked at the crowd, 8 civilians in a town that had been flying Union flags since '62. He looked at old Silas in the alley. He looked at the doctor who had stopped watching Ruth and started watching him. A Confederate officer taking a man by force from a Union sympathetic church, in front of witnesses, with testimony already posted to a federal office in the next county. This was a calculation, and the calculation had changed. He turned his horse. He rode south. His 2 men followed without being told. The crowd dissolved the way crowds do, when the organizing tension has left the room gradually, in small groups with backward glances. She closed the door. They stood in the nave in the winter light and said nothing for a long time. The colored windows threw their light across the floor as they always had, indifferent and consistent.
You weren't finished.
I was close enough.
You said an hour, maybe 2.
When there are 8 people at the door, close enough becomes sufficient.
She turned to look at him. He was pale, the sustained effort of standing through all of that, the particular cost of facing his brother in front of witnesses, but steady. His jaw was set in the way it got when he was managing pain and had already decided not to mention it. She pressed her hand against his left side, lightly. A check. He breathed in sharply.
You need to sit down.
I know.
And you need to finish.
I know that too.
He caught her hand before she could take it away. Not firmly, gently, the way you catch something you don't want to break. His hands were cold. She noticed this in the specific way she noticed very few things about very few people, which is to say, completely. He held her hand for a moment in both of his, then he released it. They went back to the sacristy. 3 days later, a Union soldier arrived in Garrow's Crossing. Corporal Samuel Hayes, 4th Ohio, who had come a long way and intended to come further if necessary. He had heard, through a chain of information that had passed through 4 people across 2 counties, that Thomas Whitmore was in the area. He had not come to arrest him. He was one of the 60. His mother and his 2 sisters moved out of the path of a burn order on a night in October by a man who appeared without warning and left without giving his name. Hayes had spent 3 months trying to find that man. He had a written statement, notarized in Macon, describing precisely what he had witnessed. He wanted to add it to whatever was being compiled. Ruth showed him to the sacristy and stood in the doorway while they spoke. She didn't listen closely. She looked at the orchard through the small window. The buds she'd noticed a few days ago had made progress, still tentative, still far from certain, but further along than they'd been. Things moved whether you were watching them or not. This was either reassuring or alarming, depending on the day. When Hayes left, she turned back to Thomas.
This doesn't resolve everything.
I know.
The testimony still has to go through the right channels. There are people who would prefer it doesn't reach those channels at all. It could take months. It might not.
Thomas.
He stopped.
I know what it might not do. I'm not asking it to do everything. I'm asking it to be a record. Those are different ambitions, and the second one is achievable.
He nodded slowly. Outside, Something small and inexplicably optimistic had begun singing in the orchard, a bird who had apparently decided that late February was close enough to spring to justify the effort.
I need to leave tomorrow. Macon first, then further, wherever the testimony needs to go. If Cornelius moves to contest it, I have to be in the place where it's being contested.
Yes,
Ruth,
I know.
He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and took out a folded piece of paper. He set it on the table between them. She looked at it. Then she went to the table and took his pencil and tore the corner from the bottom of the final page of testimony, just enough room. She wrote her address on it. The house 3 streets north of the church. The house that had been hers and James's and then just hers. She held the corner out to him. He took it. He held both pieces of paper for a moment, his and hers. Then he put hers in the inner pocket and she picked up his and read it. A town in Georgia she had never been to. A cousin's name beneath, he would know how to reach him wherever he ended up.
if there's anything left worth writing to.
There will be.
She said it without qualification. She was not, by nature, a person who made promises without evidence. But she said it, and she meant it, and he looked at her with an expression that she thought she would still be thinking about when the buds on the orchard trees had become leaves, and the leaves had fallen and come back again.
Then I'll wait for the first letter.
Don't wait too long. I'm not a patient woman.
I've noticed.
She laughed. It surprised her, the laugh, and how uncomplicated it was. She hadn't laughed like that, without calculation or apology, in longer than she could accurately remember. She walked him to the door of St. Brendan's in the early morning, before the town was properly awake. The sky was the particular color of very early light, gray shading into pink at the horizon, the kind of light that doesn't commit to anything yet, but suggests that commitment is coming. He stopped at the door and turned to her. She had thought there might be some last thing to say. There usually was some formulation that arrived too late, some true thing that assembled itself only in the moment of departure. But she found she had already said what she needed to say, or he had, or both of them had across those evenings in the sacristy with the lamp burning low and the winter pressing at the walls. He raised his hand, not a wave and not a salute, something between the two that was entirely his own. She raised hers. He walked south and turned at the end of the road, and she stood in the door of St. Brendan's until there was nothing left to watch. She went inside. She went to the sacristy. She sat at the table where he had worked for 2 weeks, which still had his papers spread across it, still held the faint impression of his handwriting on the pages he'd taken with him. She took a fresh sheet from the supply chest. She dipped the pencil. She wrote, "Dear Thomas." She stopped. The bird in the orchard had started up again. The same one or a different one with identical conviction she couldn't tell, and it didn't matter. She wrote, "The man from the corner cot made it through the night. I thought you would want to know that some things survive against expectation, even when expectation is not particularly optimistic." She paused. She wrote, "I will not make you promises I cannot keep, but I will tell you that this morning I walked back into this church, and for the first time in 2 years, it did not feel like a place I had chosen to remain. It felt like a place I had chosen to be. I am not sure I can explain the difference, except to say that there is one, and it matters, and I think you would understand it without needing it explained." She looked at what she had written. Outside, the orchard was fully lit now. In an hour, the ward would need her. Patients would arrive with the morning supplies. The work would begin again in its slow, necessary way. But for right now, she sat at his table with her letter not yet finished, and she thought about the difference between remaining and choosing. About how the smallest decisions, a locked door, a word in the dark, a corner of paper with an address on it, sometimes turned out to be the ones that changed everything. She picked up the pencil. She kept writing. There is a kind of courage that gets talked about often, the kind that goes toward danger without knowing the outcome, the kind that stands in doorways and refuses to move. That courage is real, and it costs something real. But there is a quieter kind, The kind that sits down at a table in an empty room and picks up a pen and writes "Dear Thomas" on a blank page, knowing full well what was lost the last time and choosing to move toward it again anyway. Not because the loss no longer hurts, because it does, and she writes the letter all the same. If this story reached something in you, leave a comment. Tell me about a time you chose to trust again after it had cost you. Not a perfect moment, not a story with a guaranteed ending, just the moment when you looked at the risk clearly and moved toward it anyway. I think those stories deserve to be somewhere other than inside you.